Hello, welcome to the channel. Today is a very special interview. I was able to sit down with Carnivore OG Amber O'Hearn. Amber has been studying and eating low-carb diets in some form for the past 25 years, the last half of which have specifically been the Carnivore Diet, which she helped bring into modern awareness by giving the first conference talks on the diet in 2017, organizing the very first Carnivore Conference in 2019, and writing the first scientific paper with Carnivore Diet in the title in 2020. As such, she has unique insight into the history of this trend and the common pitfalls of new adopters and influencers. Amber is a free speech maximalist and advocate of privacy-enhancing and censorship-resistant technologies. It was awesome to finally interview Amber. We first met in March of 2024 at the Collaborative Science Conference in Las Vegas. And in this talk, we discuss everything from the carnivore diet that she is currently consuming, how carnivore has changed over the years, pregnancy and meat-based diets for kids, vitamins and minerals, salt, and then a ton of viewer questions that I got from you. So I really hope you enjoy this interview. I definitely did. She has a wealth of knowledge and you definitely need to watch this one. And with that, let's welcome Amber O'Hearn. We are here with Amber O'Hearn. Amber, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
You're so welcome. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So tell us a little bit about your background, how you got started on carnivore and all of that.
I had weight struggles through most of my life, and I had been brought up vegetarian. We didn't never have meat, but we almost never had meat. We would eat sometimes chicken and fish. It was basically a very vegetable-heavy household, and that was the kind of diet we believed in as being good for health and good for animals. And when I first started having weight issues when I went to university, I immediately was drawn to that kind of literature because that's what I knew. So this was a long time ago. I'm 51. I had heard on the internet, which was not even the web yet, about low carb diet. And I thought it was the craziest thing I'd ever heard of. So obviously wrong. Like everyone knows you're supposed to eat complex carbohydrates at least, right? and so it wasn't until I had not just spectacularly failed to do anything about my weight using a vegetarian diet, but also I had traveled to Russia as part of a Russian degree I was doing and ended up eating meat because it was just easier to eat meat than to try to get my weird diet needs met there. And when I came back, I had lost some weight. And although there could have been several reasons for that, I didn't necessarily think that it was the meat that caused me to lose weight. I realized that it wasn't what was holding me back and that maybe I should start broadening my sights on what was going on. And that was 1997. And the book from Dr. Eads had just come out, Protein Power. And so when I was browsing the bookshelves one day, I saw that and I just devoured that book. It made so much sense to me. It was counterintuitive, but it made sense because it was just so well written and described, and it gave me a completely different view on the science. And I realized that I had a much, let's say, lower standard of what I would accept for something to be scientific, and I hadn't really thought it through. And with that book, everything was full of citations, and I actually went to the medical library and found the journal papers, so I had to go in person at that time, and I think I still have photocopies from that time. And that completely addressed the weight problems that I was dealing with at that time. And so I was a low-carb dieter for a really long time. And for the most part, that had been really good for me. But after I had had a couple of pregnancies where I had gained a lot of weight, I didn't stay low carb during the pregnancies. And not because I thought it would be dangerous, but just because my cravings were too bad. And I have a family history of hyperemesis where you throw up really severely in a lot of my line. Like my mother was hospitalized when I was in utero, for example. And so I was just kind of doing whatever I needed to do to not be sick. I was also, and I didn't really connect it at the time, but I had been diagnosed with major depressive disorder when I was around 20, and I had been on mostly Prozac for a long time. I never really got relief from antidepressants. Eventually, in my 30s, I didn't know what it was, but I had a hypomanic episode. I had a few. I now believe that they were medically induced because we know that antidepressants can kindle bipolar disorder. I got re-diagnosed with bipolar disorder, bipolar type 2, meaning meaning I didn't ever have psychotic breaks or true manias. I was really excited, even though I thought, wow, that's really dangerous, much more serious, I was thinking, than depression. But I was happy because I thought, now I'm going to get the right treatment, and this explains why I've never been able to get better. But that was really wrong. I tried like 3 or 4 different anti-bipolar meds, and none of them helped with my bipolar symptoms, and each one of them came with horrible side effects that were almost worse than the disease. So I had that connection, and I had this weight that every time I would get pregnant, I would gain some weight, and then I would never lose to the same degree. I was just slowly gaining weight over the years, and I didn't know why, because I was still on a low-carb diet this whole time. And I had dived into the research after that first book, and I felt like I knew exactly why this worked and why it should work, and I didn't know why it wasn't working for me. And in a way, I still don't really know. But I do know that, I started going a bit nuts because I felt like there's got to be some piece that I'm missing. And I spend an embarrassing amount on like different supplements where I would read like, oh, maybe you have like a problem with methylation, or maybe you're not getting enough of this vitamin or that vitamin. And I would try all these things, and none of it did anything really. But I did one day come across this group called Zeroing In on Health. And their whole thing was that they were doing zero carb, they called it. It actually meant no plants, which is maybe not intuitive with zero carb, because you might think that that could be something slightly different. But I thought, well, that, here again, I was having that's too crazy kind of moment, right? But I thought, these people seem to, a lot of them had similar background stories to me, like they were on a low carb diet and they just weren't getting the results that they knew they should be getting, and that this helped them, usually for weight. There were all kinds of other health stories in there, but I was so vain. I just wanted to get the weight off. And that was like the number one concern. I had no thought that any other problem that I might be having could be connected to diet anyway. So my head wasn't even really there. I thought, well, I could try that. Like I could maybe do it for a few weeks and just see how it goes, and then go back to my regular low carb diet. If it works really well, then maybe once I lose this weight, I'll go back to my low carb diet and it should maintain. And, worst case, I'll have to do this every once in a while or something like that. It actually took me weeks to kind of build up the courage and like get my mindset like, okay, I'm going to have this, I'm going to shop for this. And I was such a vegetable person. Like I ate salads every day. I ate cruciferous vegetables every day because I liked them, because that was how I was brought up. I tried it and I started losing weight immediately, and I was ecstatic and really happy. But I wasn't just really happy. My mood started stabling out. And my husband at the time was the one who first said it out loud. I didn't want to really say it because, there were lots of reasons for me to be happy. So I didn't want to misplace it. And even after those 3 weeks, I kept going because it was too good. I wasn't going to stop. Later, it became clear that it really had put my bipolar into remission indefinitely. That was the kicker. And that's why that was 2009. And here I am still advocating for carnivore diets.
I wanted to take a moment to thank ButcherBox for sponsoring today's video. ButcherBox is a premium meat subscription service dedicated to delivering high-quality grass-fed, grass-finished beef, organic chicken, pork-raised crate-free, and wild-caught seafood right to your front door. ButcherBox prioritizes ethical sourcing and sustainability with the convenience of free shipping with every order. You can build a custom box and create a perfect mix of cuts for your lifestyle with over 25 cuts to choose from, and you can switch it up with every order. Or you can let ButcherBox curate a box for you. Every box is a chance to try something new, along with a few tried and true classics. If you'd like to try ButcherBox out for yourself, head to the link in the description. They have a lot of awesome deals in the month of September. From September 5th to September 8th, you can get their football special. New members will receive ground beef and wings in each box they order for 6 months. I love the convenience of ButcherBox, and having fresh, ethically sourced meat delivered right to my front door is awesome, especially because I'm super busy with the twins and full-time work and running a household. Thanks again to ButcherBox for sponsoring today's video.
So that's how I got started. Long answer.
Story. I've heard you tell the story several times on other podcasts and interviews that you've done, but it's such a powerful story, and I think it's important to share. You've been carnivore for a very long time.
Yeah. The last few years haven't been very easy for me because I got very sick. I had a salmonella infection, and I didn't recover recover for a really long time.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, everything is a lot more in focus.
Totally.
But
Are you feeling better now?
I am a lot better. Yeah,
Good.
I am a lot better. I still have not lost all the weight that I gained through the course of that time. And that's still really frustrating to me, especially when I'm often a kind of spokesperson and people will say, well, she doesn't look all that healthy and she's not skinny, so why should I listen to what she has to say? And that's hard for me because I know what I know. And and my body's just, it needs the time, I guess, to do what it's going to do.
For sure. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. That's good. At least mostly better.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're currently eating a carnivore diet. Which version of carnivore are you eating? Do you include dairy? Do you just do lion? Like, what does carnivore look like for you?
I'm still mostly, for a default, the OG kind of carnivore style that I cut my teeth on is the one that I think is the best, and it's the default that I always go back to, even if I play around with other things. But there's some leeway in that. And so what I mean by that is, like, you eat as much of meat as you want. Any kind of meat will do, but it should, of course, be relatively fatty. Otherwise, it's just not going to be sustainable. But for the most part, I think people don't necessarily have to try to do that because their appetite will tell that. As long as you aren't fat aversive, your appetite will say, you need to go for the fattier piece today, and if you follow that, it often works. However, I have dabbled in different things. Let's see, you asked about dairy. My experience with dairy is that it doesn't cause me any mood problems or anything like that, but I cannot really lose weight with more than a small amount of dairy in my diet. It stalls me, doesn't necessarily cause me to gain, and so I consider only an occasional thing, at least until I'm weight stable again. Also, it's high in vitamin A, and I don't know if we'll get around to talking about that. And I'm a little bit leery of that. The other thing that I have done some of, but haven't been very successful with for long term myself, partly because I discovered it post-infection, and I haven't had the gut to be able to do it, is what I sort of accidentally coined as Keto AF, which stands for ketogenic animal foods.
Okay.
It's basically a lot like the diet that Paleomedicina does, which they call the PKD, the Paleolithic Ketogenic Diet, where they're aiming for at least 2 to 1 fat to protein by gram. But I wanted to use a different name because the diet that they use is very specific, and they really don't want other people using that term unless they're doing exactly what they're doing in order to prevent confusion. And so I thought, well, okay, I won't call it that. And it is a little bit different because I think when you do 2 to 1 all animal foods, you don't necessarily need to have the dairy restriction or the organ inclusion or the overall volume restriction that they would have on the PKD. So I'm glad to have a different word. But of course, nobody knows what it means when they say see Keto AF. They just think something else. And
yeah.
So it's not great for a name for that in that way.
I love it. So how many meals a day do you typically eat?
I just eat to appetite, and I think that's usually 2 meals a day.
And on average, how much meat do you think you eat in a day, like pounds?
It's varied so much. When I was first on carnivore and I was losing weight fairly rapidly, I was eating at least a couple pounds of meat a day, probably 2,500 plus calories a day. I know that because I took a couple months where I measured it out of curiosity, but I wasn't normally measuring it, and I wasn't trying to meet some specific thing. If you're eating to appetite, it's going to vary with activity. It's going to vary with the kinds of foods that you're eating and when you're eating. And like, I might go out to a restaurant and eat a bunch and then not be hungry again for a while. So it stables out at maybe 1.5 to 2 pounds of meat a day, and usually divided into 2 meals, if I had to make a broad generalization.
No, totally. I get it. I have the exact same experience. You know, there's some days I'll eat 3 pounds of meat, and then the next day I'll eat 1.5 pounds. You know, it just depends on your hunger levels, how much you've been working out, the time of the year, how hot or cold it is, you know, light or dark it is outside. There's so many different variations that influence it for sure.
And with the fattier meat, it will take up less weight. So if I eat like a really fatty day, it's going to be less volume overall.
That's true. That is very true. So looking at carnivore, since you've been here for such a long time, you're an OG carnivore. How has the carnivore diet changed from when you first found your original group to now? How the evolution of carnivore?
Well, to my mind, it hasn't changed at all, but a lot of people have been advocating for what they call the carnivore diet with all kinds of different ideas around it and breaking it up into, I don't even remember the words that they use for like stricter and less strict. If it's got coffee and tea and spices, I would still call it carnivore. If it's really got, like plants that you're chewing on, I wouldn't really call that carnivore.
Yeah.
And dairy, you can do carnivore with or without that. There have been a lot of like sort of variations of stricter or laxer. What's been interesting is that it took off so much culturally. Like it's still a pretty small niche in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But like I meet people who have heard of it. They haven't heard of me, but they've heard of it. And they'll say, oh, you do carnivore. I've tried that or I've heard of that. And that just kind of blows my mind because I still think of it as some weird niche little group of people.
It still kind of feels that way to a degree, but when I talk about it with people, there are more and more people like, oh, carnivore, okay. And they're not as like, what anymore? It's weird how much it's even changed.
Yes. Like people this hasn't happened to me in a restaurant for a long time, but when I was like in the early 10s, I would go to a restaurant and I would try different ways to express what I wanted, because if you don't express it the right way, they'll just keep bringing you plants on your plate and it's wasteful, and it just that they're trying to help and you have to tell them no all the time. So at a certain point, I started saying at the beginning of my order, I'd say, well, I only eat meat, so I want blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And even at that time, people would say, so you don't eat any meat? Like it just was like, they couldn't hear that. It wasn't a hearable thing at that time. I started going to a lot of conferences starting in 2016. The first conference I ever spoke at was the Ancestral Health Symposium 2016. At that point, a bunch of keto conferences kind of exploded in availability and popularity. And I would go to every single one of them. I was so excited about it. I was speaking at it was 2017, I remember really clearly, when every conference that I went to was really vegetable focused. They would always have people talking just about the importance of vegetables in their diet. And I would come up and say, well, what about this or what about that, to just try to get people to think about it differently, because I had been doing research showing that all this stuff about vegetables being important didn't seem to be based on any actual real science.
Right.
And then the next year, every conference that I went to, at the Q&A, someone would come up and say, but what about carnivore? And the people didn't know what to say. They hadn't heard of it. A couple people, like I can remember very specifically, Eric Westman said, yeah, that probably sounds fine. But everyone else was like, they didn't know what to think about that kind of question. And it was at that moment that I thought there needs to be a carnivore conference. Mm-hmm. And making that happen was one of the funnest things I've ever done, actually.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of the lectures from that conference that you put on, and it was amazing.
It was really like
Amber,
the product of its time.
Oh, I love it. So I have a few questions about carnivore and pregnancy. As far as carnivore and pregnancy, you said you were never on keto or carnivore when you were pregnant, correct?
Well, my last pregnancy, I got pregnant within weeks of starting carnivore for the first time.
Wow. Okay.
So it created kind of threw a monkey wrench into things. It was actually better in the long run for a couple of reasons. And one is that I had to quit all my bipolar meds. So I was able to never get back on them, whereas getting off them would have been more of a risky, it would have felt like a risky thing to do. I had to go off them, so that was good for me. But in that pregnancy, I didn't stay carnivore. I can remember very clearly, I was sitting on my couch one day and I started thinking about carbs. And it was weird because I was way past, I'd been on a ketogenic diet already for a dozen years. I'd never had carb cravings really, but I was way past any kind of craving for anything beyond carnivore. So I thought, well, I'm not going to cave into that this time. This time I'm just not going to do it. And the thoughts of carbs just started coming more and more and more until I was sitting on the couch, I'm going. I admit it. I went to a restaurant and I ordered 2 entrees, 2 carby entrees, and ate them both. I don't know.
How'd you feel afterwards?
Cornbread thing. Good.
I love it. So did that then start you down a path of just eating carbs for the rest of the pregnancy, or was that just...
The first trimester, I ate quite a bit of carbs. And I think it was partly, again, because of like trying to keep the nausea down.
Yeah.
And then over the second trimester, I went more toward low carb.
Okay.
And then by the third trimester, I was close to carnivore. Not fully, but close to. And then as soon as the baby came out, I was like, bam, we're going right back.
Ready.
So I don't think that people necessarily need it, but I also think that sometimes you just have to give your body what it's asking for.
Completely.
I don't know, it's tricky.
No, I completely agree with you. My twin pregnancy was way before I got on carnivore, and I did full standard American diet. I gained 70 pounds. It was terrible. But we're contemplating having another child. And I have always said, sure, I'm going to try to stay carnivore, but I had a weird meat aversion during my first pregnancy. I ate meat a lot before. But then
I got that too.
It was like the idea of a steak was like, I'm good. Or we'd get like a rotisserie chicken in the past, and I was like, I'm good. I don't know what it was. So I don't know if that would happen again. And if that happens again, I'm not going to just, not eat, Yeah, I think it's every person.
Yeah, I forgot about that, Jenny.
Yeah.
I did have meat aversion, and it wasn't so much to cooked meat, but I couldn't cook it. I couldn't even look at it.
It's
it's really strange.
So weird sometimes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So what are your thoughts, on carnivore and pregnancy? Like, do it if you can. I think that as far as if you're going to try to start carnivore while pregnant, I always advise maybe wait a little bit.
If you're already low carb, it might be all right, but
yeah,
you don't want to necessarily go through keto adaptation.
That's what I think of. I would not want to have the keto flu when I'm pregnant too.
Yeah, you've got enough going on. But, you got to think about, there are whole societies, even in living memory, maybe the traditions aren't there so much now, but in Arctic places or in Mongolia, where people didn't eat carbs and, didn't stop Genghis Khan. So
yeah, exactly. No, I think it's perfectly safe. I just think about if I was doing it right now, I'm going to be 2-year carnivore in December.
Mm-hmm.
If I got pregnant now, I would be like, okay, cool. We'll see if we can let this ride. But for somebody that's a newbie and just starting, I need to be maybe ease into it a little bit more. Listen, your body, regardless of your journey. But I think it's perfect.
And be forgiving of yourself.
Yeah, give yourself some grace. It's not the end of the world if you have some carbs here and there. Your body needs it sometimes. You needed the quiche. What are your thoughts about meat-based diets for children?
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think we need meat.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually just did a video on that. Because my boys, they eat meat at every single meal. They'll have some vegetables and some fruit too. Once in a blue moon, they'll have some grains. But meat is every single meal, and it's what they always finish first and need refilled. They don't need anything else refilled. And these kids
that's good.
Well, since they started eating solid foods, and they're like little linebackers. They're sturdy. They're tall. They dwarf some 5-year-olds. And they're 2.5. Harry is actually reading, literally can read. It's blowing my mind. Max can too, but Harry's it's wild. And I really think the meat is what is doing that. That's my hypothesis. So meat-based diets for children, good.
Yeah, I'm on board.
I love it. So you've done some deep dives over the years with your research, specifically on salt and with different vitamins and minerals. So what are your thoughts on salt? Are you in the lots of salt camp, or are you more in the minimal to no salt camp, or are you somewhere in between?
Definitely minimal to no, unless you have specifically demonstrated to yourself that you do perceivably better with high salt. And if you do, I think you might want to look into if there's something else that you're doing that's causing that. Okay. And the reasons are a few. One is that, the pioneers in carnivore, like Vilhjalmur Stefansson and the bear Owsley Stanley. They didn't use salt, and the zero carb carnivores where I came from, there wasn't like a moratorium on salt. Nobody said you've got to stop eating salt, although a lot of us did. There was never this idea that you should be super loading on salt. And I think that idea was popularized by James DiNicolantonio, and I don't agree with any of his reasons. He doesn't even do a ketogenic diet himself. I don't think it's his expertise. And so, yeah, I did finally end up doing a talk on that because I really wanted to both find out more about it, and having a talk to give really gives me a bit of a deadline to finish something. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll actually link it in the description of this video so that everybody can watch it because it's awesome.
Super. Thank you. Yeah, so it just seemed to me that it's not evolutionarily consistent to need a lot of salt. And if we're needing a lot of salt, then maybe we need to look at what's going on there. On the other hand, eating salt to taste, I don't know that necessarily is causing a problem. I do know some people who have been carnivore for a while, but they ate salt to taste, and then they tried giving it up, and oftentimes they felt better. Okay. So it's something one could try. But I also think that I don't know very many people who feel like that was the missing piece or something.
Right, yeah. One concern that often pops up for new carnivores is, will I get enough vitamins and minerals eating a carnivorous diet? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I even wrote a paper about this. You can definitely get any of the necessary vitamins and minerals, even to the level of the RDAs, by eating foods, none of which come from plants. It's not really a very natural way to eat carnivore. And in fact, it involves so much liver that I would say it's not a good way to eat carnivore. Probably causes problems to do that. So then you're left with, okay, do I eat a carnivore diet that's quite obviously not meeting RDAs in certain ways? Or do I try to change it around to make it match RDAs? Or do I supplement it with other foods or supplements to try to make it match RDAs? And it's something you kind of have to decide what your own level of comfort with that kind of risk is. But what I will say is that the RDAs were based on studying people who are eating a grain-based diet. Mm-hmm. And there are so many things that are going to interfere with or, change the potential needed amounts of different vitamins and minerals when you're eating grains that I almost feel like we're kind of at square one if we're eating a carnivore diet. Not totally, like we know what the essential nutrients are, but the amounts, so like grains have phytates in them, which interfere with mineral absorption like zinc. Your metabolism completely changes, and vitamins are actually used, the purpose they have in the body is that they're coenzymes to catalyze metabolic reactions. And if you're doing metabolic reactions that are, skewed toward a different way than what people were doing that those RDAs were established on, mm-hmm. then it would be shocking if the amounts weren't different. Deficiencies can take a long time to show up. I know that a lot of people were really harmed or burned by doing vegetarian diet where they slowly, gradually were depleted in certain vitamins, and they didn't really realize how it was affecting their health until they started eating meat again. And it would be very bad if we found out that, 12 years down the road, people who are eating only a carnivore diet have gradually depleted certain important nutrients and aren't feeling well. And I think we've got to take that kind of reasoning seriously. On the other hand, most of the people that I know are really thriving despite not meeting the exact RDAs. And I think there are really good reasons for why that would be. So I'm personally not that concerned about it, but it's the kind of thing where I can't advise for you what level of risk to take.
Right. No, I totally feel you on that. I know for me, when I first started carnivore, that was my number one concern was how am I going to get all the vitamins and minerals I need to be healthy? Because I just thought they all came from plants, when really most of them are coming from the meat.
Yeah, that's a big psyop, isn't it? I kind of think like maybe the government or whoever was trying to encourage people to eat vegetables. They had to say, well, why would you ever eat them? Well, they are high in vitamins and minerals. Right. That doesn't mean that meat's not high in vitamins and minerals, right. But then the focus of that for vegetables started taking over, so that people started saying, well, you eat meat for the protein and you eat vegetables for the vitamins and minerals, and then you get this balance, but it's kind of mixed up.
Completely. I was very confused. There's lots of different tests you can get done to test your vitamin and mineral levels. Thinking on your research and your knowledge, what blood, urine, saliva, or other tests are accurate when it comes to measuring vitamins and minerals? And then which ones are just kind of like, you shouldn't waste your money?
That's a good question. And I actually don't know a lot about that. One of the problems with vitamin and mineral testing is that I do know about is that sometimes the levels that are in the blood don't really reflect, for example, the whole body amount. Or you could have something that's high and it's actually indicating that you're not using it very well for some reason, and that's why it's kind of built up. So my understanding is that there are kind of functional vitamin and mineral tests that you can take that are geared toward looking for products and enzymes and things that will give you a better metabolic picture. But I'm not an expert on that, and I wouldn't know where to send you for it.
I want to move into the viewer questions because we got some really good ones. I asked my viewers in both my carnivore community and on YouTube to give me some questions for you. So this is a question that so many people are curious about. I'm curious about myself. So do you think that carnivores need to eat organ meat to get the full benefits of the carnivore diet? Why or why not?
Yeah, not only do I think that you don't need to eat organ meats, but I think that eating organ meats too often can actually be detrimental. And the reason that I think that, when I say organ meats, pretty much the only organ meat that I can routinely get or anywhere that I go is liver. I've eaten brain, I've eaten lung, I've eaten pancreas. I don't really like kidney, but I've tried it. And I think that the concerns around that I'm going to say that are around organs really are only about liver. Liver, it was one of the things that the bear said we should not eat.
Okay.
I don't believe everything the bear said. I know he didn't know everything. And Stephenson has been even recorded as saying that Inuit often threw organs to the dog. He's also written down in his books plenty of evidence that organs were eaten as well. So I don't think it necessarily has to be avoided. But the problem comes, and I think it's again when people are trying to be conscientious and meet the RDAs, because the liver contains, for example, a lot of B vitamins and vitamin A, where if you're trying to meet that RDA, it's a really obvious choice to get a certain amount of that per week, and then you're kind of all set. What I have observed in the community is that people who do this end up almost without fail saying the carnivore diet doesn't work for me, and I felt much better when I started adding in carbs for whatever reason. And other people who, like, for example, the Andersons, who have been doing carnivore even longer than I have, they went through a period where they started eating liver for similar reasons, like this is kind of a health insurance kind of thing, and felt worse, not in a way worse way, but just didn't feel as good. And then they stopped eating and felt better again. And they were like, okay, not doing that anymore. And I think Kelly Hogan had a similar experience. I also think that I may have had a vitamin A overdose that may have been one of the triggers leading into this succession of disease process that led to my infection. That's speculative, but I did start taking a lot of vitamin A right before that happened. So I've become really cautious around that. You can put me firmly in the camp of don't try to eat too many organs.
Got it. I love it. I hate liver. I've tried. I cannot do it. It's disgusting to me.
I like it. That's the sad thing. But if I can add just one more thing on that, even when I was still eating liver, every once in a while, I would actually get kind of a craving for it. So I would buy and I would cook it all and I would eat a bunch that day. And I would look at it then, and I'm a leftovers person, but I would look at it the next day and just and it would sit in the fridge until I have to throw it out. Yeah. So I think maybe there was something I needed, but then my body was like, that's enough. You don't eat more of that. I wouldn't want it again for 2 months.
Yeah, I think that's a really important lesson for newer carnivores to take. Listen to your cravings in your body. You know, you obviously needed something, but then you got it and you didn't need anymore. You don't have to overdo it and eat it every day, you know?
Yeah. It's
Cool.
hard, the listen to your body thing, because there are so many things that, especially when you're on a mixed diet, that can really lead you astray. Like, oh, I've got a real craving for chocolate cake or something.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like the longer you stay on carnivore, the more cued in you become to how your body communicates with you. So I would think like a
Absolutely.
sugar cravings for me is totally different than like, I'm going to have chicken today, you know, because I don't typically eat a lot of chicken. Just to, like beef and pork is my main go-tos. But I mean, I can definitely tell the difference between I want a chocolate milkshake or I need to eat some liver, you know, but I think that comes with time.
Yeah, I totally agree. You start to really notice, like, earlier I was talking about eating fattier or leaner or eating more or less and specific foods. And it makes a lot of sense that your body would associate its specific needs with foods that it knows you'll be able to get them in. But a mixed Western diet is so full of noise. You get to learn to trust yourself again.
Yeah, exactly. So question about muscle cramping on carnivore. What are the common causes and the solutions?
Yeah, that's a really contentious one. The most common answer to that is that it's an electrolyte issue. Sometimes people have found that salt is interfering, actually, and if they stop taking the salt on carnivore, because we don't have as much potassium to balance, for example. So I do know lots of people who stopped eating salt and their cramps went away. I know some people who have started more salt and had success, but I think that's a much rarer thing on carnivore and more a keto thing. I need to mention that just 2 days ago, I think someone on my Keto AF Facebook group told me that she's been fighting cramps for years, and she decided to go with Chris Masterjohn's suggestion that carnivores need to balance their methionine with glycine, which is not something I really necessarily agree with, just because it's not been the case for the OG carnivores I know. So she started cooking, the gelatinous cuts of meat and making a collagen-y broth type thing and eating that. And she has reported, and I don't know, it hasn't been that long, but she has reported that her cramps went away on that. At the very least, that's something one could try. I don't know the answer. I wish I did.
I know.
I've had some periods in my carnivore time when I was at my leanest where I started getting leg cramps at night again. And it's something that I normally associate with keto adaptation and that would go away. And that never really resolved for me completely until after I got sick, and I would take it back.
Yeah, right. You're like, I prefer that over this. Yeah, totally. For me, I think I had some severe leg cramping in February, and I had been supplementing with like 10,000 IUs of vitamin D over the winter, but I was not also supplementing with magnesium. And I think that played a part because I stopped the vitamin D, I started supplementing with magnesium, and it went away. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that process, or you've heard of that interaction before.
I've heard of magnesium helping for sure. Sure.
Yeah. I get this question all the time from people. All right, here's a question. One viewer is still experiencing diarrhea after a long time on carnivore. Any suggested solutions for them? If the diarrhea continues after that initial, phase in the beginning, like let's say 6 months into it, is it still carnivore, or should we be looking for a different root cause of?
So I don't even think most people starting carnivore really get diarrhea. Maybe slightly looser would be normal, but after my infection, I take diarrhea really seriously because I basically had post-infectious diarrhea for over a year after my infection. And that's what led to the vitamin deficiency. I think what happened was I was no longer able to absorb.
Wow.
And that made me very sick by not addressing it sooner. Yeah, I would take it very seriously, and I would consider it malabsorption, maybe fat malabsorption. And I would go so far as to say, if you have to eat carbs or fiber or something to prevent that happening, like I'm not talking about a few days. A few days of diarrhea is maybe something you can cope with as if you're adjusting to something. But if it prolongs, I think it can cause serious health consequences. And I would intervene no matter what it takes. I don't know what exactly would cause some people to have that and other people not to, but just I'm still kind of having PTSD over that.
I bet. That sounds horrible. Oh my gosh. What are your thoughts on iodine supplementation? Yay or nay?
Maybe.
Maybe. Depends on if you're deficient or not.
If you're not eating salt, or if you're eating one of those fancy salt that's not iodized, then there aren't a lot of sources of iodine in a carnivore diet, unless maybe you're doing some like seafood special.
Eggs have a little bit, but it's also dependent on what the chicken was fed.
Right. And then on the other side of things, when you're on a low carb diet, you probably need less iodine because iodine is directly being used to make thyroid, and your T3 doesn't need to be as high and shouldn't probably be as high. You should expect to see it lower, let's put it that way, when you're on a low carb diet because it's going in tandem with your carb intake. You can sort of see reasons for both. I know that there are people who think that supplementing iodine would be really dangerous and harmful for the thyroid, and I can't necessarily prove that that's wrong, but I myself have taken iodine in the past. There was one point I was maybe 1 year into carnivore, and I suddenly was experiencing really dry skin on my hands. I can't say for sure that it was the iodine, but I tried taking Lugol's iodine, I don't remember, maybe 12 drops a day or something like that. Within a week of starting that, my hand dryness went away, and I kept taking the iodine for a couple months, and then I stopped taking it, and the problems never come back. That particular one, I can't be 100% sure it was the iodine, but I'm not afraid of it. Obviously, for myself, it might actually be really helpful, but it's hard to say.
Okay, cool. What are some tips for carnivores without a gallbladder?
I haven't personally experienced that or know anyone personally with that, but I have talked to some people over the years who have done low carb diets or even carnivore diets and have basically said it was no big deal. There may be issues if you're rapidly going from low to moderately low fat to a much higher fat diet, where you don't have that. It's basically like a reserve of bile, right? And so you would want to maybe work it up slowly. As far as I understand from other people I've talked to, it's perfectly doable.
Okay, cool. That's the viewer questions. Are you ready for your rapid fire questions?
Uh-oh, I don't know. Okay.
You got this. All right. What is your number one tip for a new carnivore?
Go all in for a period so you don't end up second guessing yourself as to whether it worked or not.
Got it. How long would you recommend?
3 weeks.
At least 3 weeks. Got it. What is your favorite carnivore food?
Beef ribs.
Yeah. Okay. If you
Texas style.
if you were stuck on a desert island, what 3 things would you bring?
Oh my gosh. If I'm stuck, I'm probably going to die. So I guess I want a book, piece of paper. If I think there's any chance of help, I guess I want a load of pemmican.
So a book, some paper, and some pemmican.
Yep.
Love it. Perfect. All right.
Oh no, a pen. What am I going to do?
I don't know. You're going to have to write with your blood or something. All right. What is the most common mistake that new carnivores make?
Not eating enough.
I agree with that one. I've encountered a weight loss stall on carnivore. What would be your advice to get the scale moving again?
Oh gosh. Make sure that the foods that you're eating are home cooked foods. So like cut out things like, I'm trying not to say the P word. But like sandwich meats and stuff like that might have additives in them.
Yeah.
That would be one thing. And make sure you're eating enough, because you could be going into this like feedback cycle of eating a little less and your metabolism scaling down and doing that over and over. So eat more, not less, and get enough fat.
Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently if you were starting carnivore today?
Nothing.
Nothing. Like, it was perfect.
It was.
That's okay. That's awesome. All right. Finally, last question. If you were able to go back and give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
Does it have to be carnivore related?
Anything related.
Just believe in yourself.
That's all it takes, I think.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Amber, this was awesome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. And I know that my audience is going to love this interview.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been a real pleasure. It's nice to talk to you.
Amber was amazing to talk to. I'll put some links to her papers and her lectures in the description below. I don't typically do a ton of interviews, but I just had to interview Amber. She's amazing, and I always look forward to speaking with her. So I really hope you enjoyed this interview. On the screen, I'm going to put a couple of videos that I think you may like. I'm also going to put a link to my new second channel, Jenny Mitich, etc. This is more vlog style content, so if you're interested in that, hit that link, head over and subscribe, and then hit notifications so you won't miss a single video over there. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.